Everybody, welcome to this meeting. I'm about to come in online, but we will start. Thank you to the deputation for coming to see us this evening. This meeting is being filmed, as you are aware. It's on Zoom, so I'd like to point that out. And if we could now turn to the, we have our apologies. We have, could you tell us who we have?
Certainly, yeah. So I just filming a meeting, so we just draw everyone's attention to what's on the front of the printed agenda versus filming meetings.
Okay, so if I can just, if everybody has the agenda in front of them, we have apologies for absence at the moment.
So we have apologies for absence from Councillor Ogyeho, Councillor Amin, and Councillor Amory.
Thank you. And Phil, do we have any items of urgent business in advance of the deputation?
We do not have any items of urgent business, Chair.
Thank you. So who will be presenting from the deputation today?
Carmel, Sydney, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear.
So, right, so I think with declarations of interest first, Chair, just to make sure everything.
Okay, does anybody have any declarations of interest regarding the meeting? No? Thank you.
Yeah, so as far as the deputation goes, we have the Chair's agreed a deputation from members of the public in regards to some waste changes and the Edmonton incinerator. There are 3 people here to give the deputation party, I believe. There's Carmel, Sydney, and another. Apologies, I've forgotten your name. But you will have 3 minutes to introduce the deputation, and then there will be a short time afterwards for members to ask questions. Yeah, ready when you are, please start.
Okay, shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, I'm Helen Mayer, and I'm going to give the presentation, and Carmel and Sydney will answer questions with me, and Sydney has also circulated an information document, which I hope you've all received. Okay, so I'll begin now. We hear about item 9, briefing on the changes to climate waste legislation and the implications for both reduction and recycling in Haringey and for the Edmonton incinerator proposals. So what are we calling for this panel to do? In summary, we're asking you to firstly address our questions about Haringey reduction and recycling in relation to the new legislation, and secondly, refer concerns about the incinerator to the main scrutiny panel, recommending that they instruct Haringey's North London Waste Authority representatives to call for it to adapt and future-proof the scheme in line with latest DEFRA and GLA remodelling. So firstly, reduction and recycling. The new legislation will render Haringey's 2021 reduction and recycling submission to the GLA obsolete, and the amount of residual waste for incineration will be drastically reduced. So our questions on this are: how can the council monitor and influence how North London Waste will both advance its waste management and adapt to resulting reductions in residual waste? When will Haringey update its reduction and recycling plan with its target of 38% recycling by 2022, which it now says it won't meet? Will Haringey apply for an exemption to continue commingling? How will Haringey use income from the extended producer responsibility scheme and new burdens compensation? And how does Haringey propose to facilitate the following: more local and in-store collection, including deposit return, community drinks container collections, practical advice around more waste separation, food waste collection from all estates, plastic film collection, engaging residents, and engaging community organisations to help with implementation? Secondly, the current Edmonton incinerator project. There's already widespread concerns about overcapacity of the new incinerator due to major changes since its inception in 2015. The new legislation will reduce residual waste and increase overcapacity even more. The Mayor's office had already estimated a 950,000 tonne surplus for the London region, and it will now reforecast due to the new legislation. Because drinks containers will go on the deposit return route, contamination from commingling and plastic-lined drink containers will reduce, more metal will be recycled, food and garden waste will go to anaerobic digestion. And there's not enough flexibility in the new design to adjust to reductions in residual waste because the number of treatment streams has been reduced from 5 to 2. So North London Waste actually plans to import waste if local supplies reduce. There are other serious concerns not directly related to the new legislation, which we don't have time to spell out here. Carbon emissions, ultrafine particle pollution, and fewer circular economy jobs. All this means that the current design is increasingly environmentally and financially unsustainable, a potential stranded asset, undermining the council's duty of value for money. But there's still time and scope to review, adapt, and future-proof the scheme for our borough and our planet. As elections approach, residents will become increasingly aware of the issues and council actions. Haringey owns a seventh of North London Waste. It should ensure that waste handling abides by the circular economy and its climate emergency commitments. Please consider our deputation and respond with appropriate actions.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much, Helen. That was sorry. Can you hear me first of all?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to hi. Now you come on the screen and I can see you. I just wanted to check that because I've got teams in front of me. Thank you very much for your deputation and for raising these very relevant questions. We do have officers here, but as your questions came slightly late, I'm not going to ask them to answer them in this meeting because I think that would be slightly unfair, and they need to go away and consider them and come back with proper responses. In addition, what we would like to do is actually invite the North West London Waste Authority, invite a representative from North West London Waste Authority, one of their officers, to come to our next environment scrutiny meeting so that we can put questions directly. As you know, we have new people sitting on the new council members, cabinet members, sitting on the North West London Waste Authority board. And we will, as well, put your questions to them for them to consider and raise that in terms of the incinerator matter. But I think that it is very relevant, and I think that this is certainly something that as a borough we need to be considering quite urgently with the new legislation coming in. So thank you very much. Is there anybody else from the deputation who would like to raise any further matters? Kamal?
Yeah.
No. Does anybody else on the committee, do you have any further questions for the deputation?
No. Where are the questions at the moment? Were they emailed today?
Yeah, they were emailed to us.
Yeah, apologies, it was all rather late.
Don't worry, Helen, I'll have a look at the questions. And if there's anything I want to follow up with you, you've got your email address from previous communication, so I will come back to you. Thanks very much. It's really good that
Could I just add one bit of information that the campaigners about the incinerator and the capacity, etc., are meeting with Sadiq Khan on Wednesday, and I'll be present at that, so we can report back as to whether that will affect Haringey as well. But I certainly like the idea of NLWA coming along because though there's been so much talk about the incinerator, not so much information has been provided about what they're going to be doing with what they're building at the moment for the recycling and resource. I can't find anything about that, so maybe they can let us know more. Thank you.
Thank you. Aldridge, do you have any further questions?
I think what I want to ask is very similar to the questions asked. It's on the overall outline of incinerating. I'll leave that for now.
And yeah, do you have any?
No, I'd rather like Councillor Bull. I haven't had a chance to see the email yet. It came in after I'd already gone out, but I will look at it later.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you. And we go now, yeah?
Yes, and we would like you to attend the next meeting when hopefully we'll have more information.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Phil, before we go on, Chair, as a rule of thumb, can you ask people when they're not speaking, Ten and Michael? I think that was Sydney's one. What happens if you have two people with this system, it ends up like sounds like a hairdryer. That's
Okay,
feedback, yeah.
okay, can we go now on to our minutes?
Reference to the questions and the request that we have the questions.
Okay.
So if you have any to. So
Yes,
just
yes,
like
we do.
in addition to a deputation, we also received a request from a local resident who wish to submit some questions around tree preservation orders and the disparity in terms of tree coverage and tree preservation orders between the east and the west of the borough. He has sent a detailed list of questions, but we don't have an item on the agenda around that, and the cabinet member here isn't able to answer questions. So rather than bring this to the next meeting, the member of the public was keen to get some answers. So we can submit the questions in writing, perhaps if the chair would like to do that as a member's inquiry, and we can get a written answer to the member of the public in question that way.
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask, was one of the people that emailed Ruth Crowley from my ward, because she was going off about, well, we've all been going off about a tree on Logic Lane. I think I'm sure I did.
I did see an email about it, but this isn't her on the phone.
Ah, okay, fine. I would like to pick that up. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. And if we could now go on to the minutes of the last meeting. I'm not sure if you've noted, but we have had some responses to the action points which were sent out. Gideon.
Just on page 9, Chair, I only saw this because I read all this yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to email. Just so I'm clear, this is about the point I raised, and I'm sorry to keep blowing my own horn, but since lockdown, I've been doing quite a lot of cycling around, and I noticed where we're bordering railway tracks, and I think it was raised, the bottom of Quermore Road is one,
Right.
but I think there's a road at the side of Bruce Grove that borders the Enfield line, where it just looks tatty and it's not big. And what exactly do you want me to do, Phil? Because I can't remember what I said I was going to do.
I think you can just email that to me, and you can try and. I think this is probably something to do with directly, or.
Oh, see, mate, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
I raised it when I was in the cabinet.
The next time the sheet comes.
Yeah, I'll do that. So if you want to know that, I'll take it up with the cabinet member directly.
Okay.
Shall I add my issues on that as well, since it's Quermore Road?
Sorry?
Shall I give you my issues?
Yeah, I thought didn't you raise that as a member's
I
inquiry?
did, but I think I need to read it again.
Well, if I can be helpful, what I will.
Okay, can we take the discussion slightly out of discussion?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we don't have Councillor Chandwani with us this evening because she's on compassionate leave. So we will go straight to the papers that are in our pack. And if we could just have the officer briefly presenting the papers, and then we can ask any questions.
Chair, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I can I make a suggestion? Given looking at the agenda for the other meetings, you either find a way of getting seen to the next meeting, or you have an extra meeting, because I know what she's like with her portfolio. She wouldn't just have one session.
We will.
Is that okay, Donna?
Yes, we will.
Thank
We
you,
will
Chair.
get to that.
The other Chair, I'm just a couple of things I wanted to flag up from the minutes of the last
Oh, I'm
meeting.
sorry. Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that it didn't get lost in the wash, as it were. On page 3, there was an action that Simon Farrow will provide the committee with information about communication with regards to the chopping down of trees on the parkland walk. I've not received it. I don't know if I've been missed out, but I don't.
We are going to be dealing with trees in our next meeting.
Okay, so that will go
So
there.
that will go to our next meeting, because
Right.
we will be dealing with generally with trees.
Right. On page 5, following a suggestion from yourself, it was stated that the cabinet member, in this case Micah Carter, will provide a written answer around LTNs and associated issues. That may be for another meeting as well, but again, I don't want that to get, wouldn't want that to get lost. And also on page 8, again from yourself, you requested further information at a future meeting about how talks are going with bus planners and bus routes.
We have had a response. You should have been emailed a response.
Don't think I've seen that.
Have you not received the email response?
Let me follow that up and I'll resend it to you.
Okay.
Because we have not
Right,
response.
good. And then finally, yes, in paragraph 86, you've already said that trees will be coming up again in the
Yes, that's
future.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So that's fine. I just wanted to make sure those weren't overlooked.
Yes, no, we're not. We are tracking. We have had responses to some of the.
I have had some responses, yes, but not the one on the buses.
Yes. I think that was responded to, but we'll check. We do, yes, we do know that you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we could go on to the first paper that we have, which is the paper on waste recycling and street cleaning performance. And I understand, Hubert, that who is presenting that paper?
That'd be best, councillor.
Okay, fantastic. Is there anything that you would like to add to highlight from your report, and that you would like to bring to our attention specifically?
I think probably just in the current climate, just really to bring the attention that I am aware that there have been some increases in the mist collections and delays to the service due to a number of factors, namely COVID, but more recently the HGV driver shortages, which is a national issue. And I do go on to talk about this in the report, but really just to say that, yes, we are having some disruptions, but the LGA reported that 46 to 49% of authorities are struggling with this issue since July. And whilst there are disruptions, we haven't had to cancel any services, and we are able to offer the full suite of services, unlike, unfortunately, many other councils are facing at the moment.
Just to understand, you say we're not having those problems, or?
No, we are having those
We
problems
are.
as well. We are.
Because, okay.
Does anybody else have, I've got a couple of questions, but does anybody else have any questions?
You might have to go first, I've got quite a lot.
Okay. The question that I have really is around street cleaning and street sweeping. And I understand that we're talking about reorganizing that again for the year. And my concern is, at the moment, is that I had an incident where the street sweeper in Crouch End on a Sunday morning had to run off because he actually had to go and do another location. And so he could stay in the location, in the Crouch End location, while the waste that had been left out from the flats were being collected. There was a considerable mess left behind, and there was no street sweeper in Crouch End to sweep at all at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, because he'd had to leave at 9 o'clock to go off to another location. So my concern really is, are we convinced that the cleansing, the street cleansing that we're doing at the moment is working, and that they have the capacity to maintain, especially our town centres such as Crouch End? And are we aware that people are street sweepers having to go to a number of locations in a day and may not be able to be there long enough? Thank
Should I answer that now, or do you want me to go through the report, or?
But if you could answer specific questions, I think that would be useful because we've read the report, so we will be putting things out of the report.
Okay. Well, within the report, so we have to undertake some street cleansing monitoring, the NI 195 monitoring, which is obviously the recognised standard for cleanliness levels. As you can see in the report, the standards that we as a council are monitoring actually show that the cleansing standards are good. They are meeting the contract targets. So that's the first point. I think in answer to your question about where do crews have to, or sweepers have to do multiple locations, in certain locations we obviously have dedicated beat sweepers, so you'll have someone manually sweeping the roads, and then overlaid with that we have a number of different sweeping methodologies, if you like, for example mobile teams. So there is a combination of layers dependent upon the location. I think that was probably an isolated incident where the sweeper had to leave Crouch End. I can find out for you, but that the resources have been applied to maintain the standards, which, as I said, we are maintaining according to our monitoring. In terms of the crews collecting from the flats above shops, they are responsible for clearing any spillages following that collection. So where we do see that happening and they are not doing that, then please let me know, because I need to take that up with Veolia, excuse me, Veolia, because it's their responsibility in the first instance, not the sweeper's responsibility to clear up after them. So please, yeah, we'll report this after what you've said.
Thank you.
Yes, I do. So, thanks, Ben. So I just got a couple of observations. Yes, of course. Not a minute. That's better. Right. So, Beth, I've got quite a few questions, but I've also got some opening observations. And actually, the experience in my ward of White Hart Lane is a really good experience with Veolia. And I think we need to be mindful as councillors, when we do criticise Veolia, that in some instances it's a product of the fact that we have made some reductions within the contract. It's been my experience over the years I've been a councillor in the various administrations, cutting back on the number of times a road is being swept, so on and so forth. So they can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, to be honest. We have to be mindful of that, about what we expect them to deliver. And the other observation, and this is an observation I've made when it was Accord, when it was Enterprise, the contract that we have with Veolia, my understanding is that, quite frankly, they will clear as much dumped rubbish in this borough than some of the woeful people that live here are stupid enough to dump. And that's a bad place to be. We should be doing things to incentivise the local authority to fine more, to educate people more. So on that basis, my questions are coming, but the other thing I was going to say, and I was going to try and find a way of sharing it, and I will do. I was in a place called Whitstable yesterday in Canterbury City Council, and they've got some really good signage up. We love this borough. This is your rubbish. Take it with you, so on and so forth. I'd like us to go back and revisit the concept of civic pride, which was something a former councillor in this authority, Lorna Reef, pioneered when she was a cabinet member for community engagement. Getting residents in this borough to have the pride in the area that they live in, and that I think is the key. So that's my opening. That's my opening observations. I probably want to hear a little bit about whether we've got an effective campaign on fining residents. Fining, I think, should be an absolute last resort, but we should be fining people. We should be educating people about what the fallout is from them constantly dumping, and what that means for the impact of the revenue expenditure on the council, and where else we can invest our money. So, like, for instance, did you know that as a result of the residents of this borough dumping this amount of rubbish, we've had to spend this amount clearing it, and so therefore we've not been able to spend on other things like adult social care, like this or that. Putting it in those very stark terms, I think, would be really, really useful. So that's my opening observations. Can I get a copy of the cleaner Haringey strategy? I was Googling for it and I couldn't find it. So if you could ping me that would be great. I'm going to I'm not going to ask too many questions at once to give you a chance to come back. On 15, you talk about the Veolia manager. I don't know if about Veolia village manager. I don't know whether other colleagues in the meeting tonight have had an opportunity to keep in touch with theirs. But mine's Freddie Badu, and he's excellent. Very responsive, always willing to help. It's been great. I'd like to hear something, Beth, from you and officer colleagues about what we're doing to ensure that registered social landlords, housing associations, their land is being properly managed. One of the banes of my life is an estate in my ward in Crichton Road called Somerset Gardens, where the land is owned by one, there's this management company, that management company. We should be enforcing against these housing association housing estates, and also working with Homes for Haringey when we've got housing estates that are, I won't go on for too long, Donna, I promise. Housing estates that are managed between two providers. So where I live in Peregrine Road, it was originally a Homes for Haringey Falconer Court, now it's Homes for Haringey and London and Quadrant. And the London and Quadrant bin is being used by all residents, and there's dumping and fly tipping and what have you. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that. On page 16, I think the rollout, Beth, of these bins for flats is really good. It's a really good step forward, but I'd like to see it expedited and done a lot quicker. Just outside my ward in Northumberland Park are the shops between the bottom of Crichton Road and White Hart Lane Station. And I'm going to blow my own horn. I probably use the gym at White Hart Lane 2 or 3 times a week. I go to Tottenham High Road in the morning and such like. I go past, there's not a day goes past that I don't see that laundrette with loads of bags of rubbish there. So we should be using those bins more and more and more. Do you want me to stop there and you can come back on that and then I'll have another go?
Yeah, if you can, yeah. People let know.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's hard after all these years.
Sorry, Beth, if you'd like to answer any questions in those comments.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the waste container one, actually, the last one, sorry, just and I think Hubert's going to help me out on some of the, because I don't actually manage enforcement, I just manage the waste and cleansing. So I'll just start with the one about the waste containers. So yeah, absolutely, I'd love to roll it out quicker, but there's a lot of work that is involved in understanding how many and where those containers have to go. So we have to examine a given stretch of road, and predominantly, obviously, this service is for flats above shops or premises that don't have storage, hence using the tax. We have to understand in each and every property, ideally, how many bedrooms it's got, how many residents it's got, and then calculate a capacity requirement for the container. We then have to liaise with highways and other colleagues in regeneration planning and do an impact assessment in terms of equalities before we can actually come up with a final plan for where the containers can go. We also have to verify that with Veolia in terms of operational ability to be able to collect, i.e. where can the vehicle stop, and is the distance to the vehicle for the crews exceeding the maximum walking distance. So there's quite a lot of detail that needs to be understood before we can roll them out. And obviously we have to do this at every single section of road. So we are trying to go as quickly as we can. Oh, sorry, I hadn't added that we need to write to the residents and the businesses. The scheme isn't for trade waste, but we need to inform them and consult. So it's quite a long process. So I do accept that, but we are trying to move as quick as we can.
Hubert?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Councillor Ball. So in terms of enforcement, as you know, that each one of our areas has got an enforcement manager. In terms of Somerset Gardens, I know it very well because that was actually my old school back in the day. You have mentioned that we engage with owners. Firstly, that's correct, but we can ultimately issue community protection notices. What I will do, councillors, I'll ask the area managers to give me an update on that specific case. I can imagine that, and as you know, there's various RSLs that's responsible for that area. But I will get an update for you, councillor, if that's okay, on just what we're doing and what the next steps are in terms of improving the waste on the site.
I've got a few more questions, don't I? They are questions. They won't be 3-act plays, all right? Okay. Page 18, Beth and Hubert, can I ask you to liaise with my old officer team on widening the reach of the shutter gallery for businesses that we've done on a number of shops across the borough? Because I think that makes a huge difference to the appearance of businesses. And Broad Lane would be a good place to look, because I've done a couple of walkabouts on Broad Lane. Apart from, and I don't mean to be rude, but I don't want us to blame everything on COVID. Do we have any idea why the recycling rate has dropped back to 31.18, which is quite concerning? I think some analysis on 7.5 with regards to business to population ratio would be really good. And I'll give you an example. Redbridge has a higher population to business ratio than we do. And I know this from the way that they were allocated their grants when I was the cabinet lead. So it'd be good to do some analysis on whether those local authorities that have a higher population to business ratio have a higher problem with recycling, for instance, and fly tipping and all manners of what have you. I'm sure I'm not the only councillor here that's had residents complaining, and this is about on page 21, about wheelie bins not being put back properly. And what analysis is being done of that, and are there regular checks being done? Because you know what residents will say, if I'm going out at work and my wheelie bin's not put out, that's a telltale sign that I'm not at home, and so it's free for all for burglars. Page 24, one of the things, and I'm trying not to do narratives, but this is relatively important. On Tower Gardens Estate, a lot of residents complained to me and my colleagues, Dana, when we looked at introducing garden waste, because I would say that the properties on Tower Gardens Estate have a disproportionately high level of number of hedges per property, so therefore they would generate more garden waste, and so therefore they thought that was really unfair, that the charge was 75%. So on that, have we done any analysis of what, and you know that I always report, I use Love Clean Streets on a daily basis, and the amount of dumped rubbish I see, Lordship Lane and Tower Gardens Estate, that's green waste. Has there been any analysis done of the percentage of waste that's been dumped that is garden waste? And what are we doing to address that? And the last thing is on, this will be the last thing, because the others are just comments. Page 25, some analysis on the amount of fly tipping that is clothes. You see, I see bags of clothes dumped all over this borough. Why are we not flagging that up with charities so those clothes can be reused? Once they've been dumped, they're all soiled. People don't want to touch them. So I hope that's it, Donna. Thank you.
Thank you, Gideon. Sorry, Beth, would you like to answer, and then we can send the
Yeah, that's fine. So firstly, widening the reach of the shutter gallery project. I'm already in conversation with a colleague from Regeneration because as part of, and I appreciate you said you haven't got the cleaner Haringey strategy, which absolutely that can be sent on. There is a action or a commitment, to come up with a street art policy. And so we're already working with colleagues, as I say, to develop that. They have led on this shutter gallery project, but obviously I can pass back to those colleagues that I'm already speaking to about the desire to widen that. And you said Broad Lane in particular. In terms of the business to population ratio, yeah, absolutely. We can do some benchmarking with other authorities and see what that looks like compared to us and subsequently issues, as you've stated, in terms of difficulties in achieving recycling and also higher fly tipping rates. So we can have a look at that. In regard to wheel bins not being put back, excuse me, it is an issue, but I am aware of that. We are trying to tackle it. So we do have monitoring. We have 2 monitoring officers only two, fortunately, in the borough to basically assess the contract performance. And one of the targets that they need to look at is wheel bins not being put back. So we do monitor that every day. A couple of things I would just say on this. Excuse me. One is that a number of residents, and we don't know exactly where, have managed to obtain wheel bins that shouldn't really have them. So properties, for example, that have steps or access. So there are properties that have them that probably shouldn't have had them in the first place. So the resident, in some cases, it said when they got the bin that they would take responsibility for presenting and taking that bin back, and that doesn't always happen. Secondly, residents are, and I have seen this in certain areas, presenting bins themselves, which obviously under the contract is a requirement for Veolia, but people probably trying to be helpful are putting the bins out already, and sometimes that gets reported back as being bins left on the street. And in terms of creating a database, if you like, of what we're trying to do is create that to understand where the areas are where bins can't physically be put back by the crews because of steps or uneven paving, etc. So we can then monitor Veolia more effectively, because the problem is it's obviously a very large borough with 2 officers, so that is a bit of a challenge, but we are working on improving that. And there is a contract default for where Veolia don't adhere to their responsibility, which we go through each month at the contract meeting. In terms of the garden waste, no is the answer in terms of analysis as to how much is within the, well, I suppose within the residual waste, first of all. There was a waste composition study done some time ago by NRWA, and we believe that they should be doing another one shortly. So I can try and clarify when that might happen. In terms of fly tips, yes, we do analyse what that waste is made up of. So I will be able to tell you both in terms of, you mentioned clothing as well, but I can send on that data that breaks down what the composition of the fly tips is. And just on clothing, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we are running a textile trial in 3 rounds at the moment. It's a bookable service like the bulky waste. So we have had initially very positive feedback. I don't have the tonnages to hand, but we'll be looking at that and looking at a long-term view as to how we can roll that out further.
Thank you. If I could just briefly come in on, if you don't mind, just in terms of that. One of the rounds that's being done is in Hornsey, and if I could just bring this back to you, that concern was raised because they were booking collections, and then the collections were incomplete. So then the bags were being left out on the street to be collected, and then the collections didn't happen, and they did it the next day. So it has to be quite tight. So if you could monitor that and actually look to check that collections are happening when they're supposed to be happening. People liked the service. They were very happy to take part, but they were concerned that because of the other problems that we're having with drivers, etc., that sometimes they were getting putting that in the hospital.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I can look into that. And so one thing I didn't answer on was the recycling rate. So it's actually not necessarily related to COVID, the drop in the recycling rate. That's factors actually beyond our control. So one of the legislative changes, not the forthcoming ones, but in the past, there was the code of practice on the MRF regulations, which essentially meant that waste that had been recycled before was then considered contamination, so it was rejected. So our overall recycling rate was impacted on because of that. Another reason was the introduction of the chargeable garden waste, which led to an overall reduction again in our recycling as people chose not to take part in that scheme.
Sorry, Albert, you have a question?
I live in Stapleton Hall Road, which is a very tree-lined road. And obviously, both in the summer and the autumn, the leaves fall profusely.
and when it rains, it becomes very slippery. What is the council's procedure, especially in the autumn, when we have loads of leaves on the pavement and we have a lot of elderly people who find it difficult to walk on the road, on the pavement, because it's so slippery?
So we have a Leafy Plan, which is for a set amount of weeks. It's a resource over and above the cleansing teams, if you like, that is specifically to clear leaves from the pavements. It is a fluid plan, so it should be looked at. Well, it is looked at every year, and then you identify. So you have a core set of roads, and then you monitor it, which is what we do and will do this year, to check that that's fit for purpose. And what we would say is that anybody that has identified streets that they believe need further resources in terms of the leafing, to let us know, so we can have a look at that, do some monitoring ourselves, and apply more resource where required.
Sorry, yeah.
I don't know if Beth and Hubert can see me, but they may be able to hear me.
They should be able to hear you.
Yeah, so apologies for not being able to see me. In fact, it may be a relief. A quick question for Beth. It just follows up from what Councillor Ball was saying. I've been in contact with Haringey monitoring officers about bins being left on the pavement as well in the ladder roads. And it's interesting because it hasn't been a problem historically, and yet it seems to have become a problem more recently. And that does make me wonder whether, A, the operatives feel that they're under more pressure, they have less time, or whether it's new teams and they're not so well informed. But there must be some specific reasons why it's happening now, but it didn't happen, say, 12 months ago. And I do think it may well be associated to either or both of those reasons. But I think in particular, maybe specific teams are not quite so good at doing it as others. Because the information I'm getting is that the northern end of the ladder, closest to Turnpike Lane Road, in other words, are not so well served. In other words, more bins are being left on the pavement there than at the southern end. And so I can only assume that it must be different teams who are responsible for that. So that's just a thought that might be worth pursuing. And my second question was that when I wanted to report certain items very recently, I'm not aware now of who the enforcement manager is because Dave Shipp left at the end of August. So I wonder if you could tell me who is the new enforcement manager who's replaced Dave Shipp.
Thank you. Would you like to come back, please?
I'll go after you, Beth.
Okay. I think you're right you are right in terms of identifying that it's been over the last 12 months, and I think there are a number that it has, which also corresponds with the COVID and more recently HGV issues. So just to put it into context, we have a number of vacancies for HGV drivers at the moment. It's actually 7 at the moment. So the result of this is that we have got a high reliance on agency staff where you can actually get them. So the problem is you can't even get, they're not even available in the first place. And then when you can get them, they may come for a day, possibly 2 days, and then they leave to go to a more lucrative position where they've been paying up to 4 or 5 times the going rate, plus a bonus potentially with sort of some of the big commercial retail giants. So you've got a continuous process of induction by the supervisors, and also the supervisors are having to go out driving. So they are unable to do some of the monitoring themselves. As a result of having the high reliance on agency, the drivers that we do have are unfamiliar with the rounds, which means everything takes longer. So yes, you're right that they're trying to get round quicker. And as a result of that, that then impacts on the loaders. The loaders also, because of COVID, we are having, again, there's a high reliance on agency staff. And again, sometimes people turn up, they leave, and there's this constant influx of new staff that aren't necessarily getting to the required, optimum level, if you like. So that it's really difficult at the moment to make sure that everything is running really smoothly. So I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just trying to explain some of the difficulties we're having and then the impacts of that out on the streets, as you're seeing.
So, Ian, in terms of who's taken over from Dave Shipp, The new manager for the West, her name is Jennifer Barrett. She was the previous noise specialist that's acting up into that post. I've already asked her to contact you, Ian, and also we need to inform members on the West that Jennifer has taken over. So I can see you nodding, Councillor. So I will do so. So in fact, I've already done so. So you should hear very, very shortly. Dave has only left us for a couple of weeks. I'm really trying to get Jennifer to embed herself first, and then we'll send that information out. So if you give me a few days, I'll make sure that information is cascaded. But it's Jennifer Barrett. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And Festus is still in place, is he?
Nothing's changing. Just since Dave's left, Jennifer's taken that position.
Great. Thanks, Hubert.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Hubert. If I could just come in.
This will take 10 seconds.
Okay.
You want to?
That's fine.
This is what I wanted to share with everyone. Okay, so I'm just going to put my camera on, and this is important. So, this, hopefully you can see this. So that's the sign that was up in Whitstable, which I think Officer Colleagues is really powerful. So I'm hoping that's something we could consider doing as part of I'd say shared it with the leader and the chief executive on WhatsApp this morning, got a big thumbs up. So hopefully we can think about that. Thanks, Donna.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just a quick one, don't worry. I'm not going to go sorry. As you know, we've had some heavy rains, and the rains with the wind have blocked many drains, especially in the Stroud Green ward. And because there are basements, the water levels have overflowed onto the pavement and then down into the basements. Have you had many complaints about that?
Should I jump in, Beth? Councillor, I think that this isn't our part of the portfolio or my part of the portfolio. That comes under my fellow Assistant Director, Mark Stevens. So I think that might be more of an appropriate question for him, Councillor Eldridge.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Here he is. He's on call.
Yeah, it's not something I've become aware of, to be honest, Councillor. If you can send us some more details on that, it'd be very helpful. Obviously, we have had issues with block gullies as a result of some of the downfalls that we have had and the movement of detritus from the channels into the gullies, but nothing in particular relation to those sort of circumstances you've described. So if you could make sure that you can send some details through to me, we can obviously look into those if they haven't already been reported as being issues with the gullies themselves through the normal reporting process. Thank you.
I find that hard to believe, since I did send a plethora of emails regarding that during those heavy rains.
Yeah. If we can bring that to your attention generally, and Councillor Palmer will consent further. We do have a problem in Hornsey as well, where we were told following the floods in Hornsey that the drains and gutters were going to be cleared, and they haven't been, which makes it look a bit embarrassing for us with our residents, because we were assured that it was going to be. We have drains with plants growing out of them.
Yeah, that's
there's no plant.
Yeah.
So I think that I know that there's a rolling program of clearing the drains happening at the moment. But if I could ask whether you could consider prioritizing the areas that were flooded a couple of months ago.
We have been doing that. We've been working through the critical drainage areas, in particular, making sure that those locations are as clear as possible. And we were doing that immediately after the heavy storms on the 12th of July, in advance of the 25th of July.
Thank you. You've frozen at the moment, but thank you for that assurance. Yeah. If I could, Beth, I have another question, if I may. It's regarding this paper and the following one. In June, Veolia tweeted out that well done to our Stafford team, because what they had done was they had started to recycle paper and cardboard separately. in Staffordshire by providing households with bags to put paper and cardboard in. Now, it looks like an expenditure for the council to do that, but in actual fact, because it led to such a large reduction in waste, in contaminated waste, contaminated paper and cardboard that have been contaminated with glass, it's actually saved that authority a lot of money. So I was wondering, especially as we know that the changes are possibly coming in to recycle separately in any event, where there is something that we could consider bringing in even in advance of those changes and look into it. Because although it appears that it would be a capital, an outlay to do that, it actually will save, evidently save for.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, we would look at all options as part of the, you've got the forthcoming possible changes in the consultations as part of the legislation changes, but also our current contract with Veolia runs until 2025, and we will start the work shortly on the service review in terms of the commissioning options moving forward. I suppose what I would say is that it very much depends on a number of factors as to what the system is that you might use. So Staffordshire is obviously a lot more rural, and therefore they would have more space for more containers. So it probably wouldn't necessarily present an issue in terms of having an extra container to put paper and card in. As we've already just discussed here, we're struggling in some areas to have any space for that one recycling bin, let alone any more containers. So, and also the proximity of the end processing plant or merchant. So perhaps they have a paper merchant that is in closer proximity than we might have, as opposed to the materials recycled. So there's a number of reasons, and also the collection vehicle, the way you collect, etc. But yes, in answer to your question, we will be looking at that through the service review.
Thank you. Any other questions from this case? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. If we could go on to the next paper, which is on the changes to the waste legislation. Who is presenting that paper? Are you presenting that paper? Thank you.
Sorry, yes, this is me as well.
Yes.
So do you want me to present something, or you just want to do questions?
If you could present on this, I think would be very useful, because for anybody who happens to be watching the meeting. Okay,
so I'm just going to go through. I'll try and summarise it by each of the three consultations. So basically, there are 4 interlinking consultations that will run at the same time as part of DEFRA's resource waste strategy. The ones that I've talked about here today are the EPR, the extended producer responsibility. Sorry, the extended packaging responsibility, the DRS, and the consistency in household and business recycling consultation. The timescales, which are detailed in the report, and I think I need to be very clear here that they are just consultations at this stage. So we don't know a lot of answers to some of the questions that have already been asked here in terms of what the landscape of waste and recycling collections is going to look like. I mean, they are significant, but as I said, we don't fully understand what is going to happen, when and how. So the potential timescales laid out is that the EPR starts in 2023, which is the same timescale for the consistency in household and business recycling, and that the DRS will come in from phase 2 from 2024. I won't go through all the timescales because they are in the report, but essentially they start from 2023. So I'll start with the EPR. Essentially, the principles of it are that it's a UK-wide approach to encourage long-term investment and innovation, and that will be done through applying modulated fees, ultimately to try and incentivise producers to use more recyclable and reusable, refillable packaging. The whole basis of it is that the producer pays, and that it's looking at a common set of materials for recycling from households and businesses, which is glass, paper and card, tins and cans, plastic bottles, plastic pots, tubs and trays. The proposal excludes biodegradable plastics, and plastic film and flexible packaging is due to come in for businesses from 24-25 and for households from 26-27. The point of it, as I say, is to mainly make things more recyclable or reusable. That idea is to phase out non-recyclable packaging, and by 2030 they want to have 73% of all scope packaging within the UK market will be recycled. Essentially, the quality of packaging should, for recycling, increase, and that more is recycled into higher value and therefore closed loop applications. There's a secondary outcome that the EPR and DRS contribute to less packaging being littered overall. But there is a recognition that we need increased reprocessing capacity to actually handle the targets proposed. And the whole premise is that the system becomes more efficient and effective. I've set out the targets. There is talk of further targets, and they will also be looking at closed loop recycling targets. So, for example, glass remelt, but potentially also plastics, card and wood from 2026. Disposable paper cups are not included on this at the moment. Currently, there's around 0.25% recycled at present, and there is views sought on how a scheme would work, whether that might be mandatory in-store or the front of shop take back recycling from 2023. The proposal is that businesses would be obligated for this, and that basically it sets out that small and micro businesses are 35% of the market for these disposable cups. Sorry, I said it wasn't included. I meant to say it was included. So who's obligated under this? And currently, the obligation for a single item of packaging is shared across multiple businesses. Under this consultation, the proposal is to readdress that and have it as a single point. And it's also interesting that there are obligations for online retailers, which obviously, as we know, probably can contribute to substantial amounts of packaging. So the modulated fees will depend on the amount of packaging produced and the ease of recycling of that packaging. The first phase of the EPR in 2023 will enable what they're calling full cost recovery payments to local authorities, and the first payment will be made from October 2023. The basis of the payment of full cost recovery is for what they're terming necessary costs. So what we know at the moment is that will be for collecting, sorting, recycling packaging waste, collecting, disposing of packaging waste and residual waste, and managing the litter. So there's some big numbers here in terms of the money available. 726 million when the extended producer responsibility is fully operational, increasing to 915 million in 2032. That's just for the collecting, sorting and recycling of it. For the collecting and disposing of the packaging and residual waste, 289 million when the EPR is fully operational, reducing to 251 million in 2032. In terms of payments or costs payments available for the litter and refuse management costs, first year it's 200 million for the management of bin and ground packaging litter. It is likely that it would include provision for charities. So the payments are based, as I say, we don't know exactly. We know some of the numbers, but we don't know what that looks like. We don't know how it's going to be distributed in terms of who gets what exactly. But what we do know is that there's likely to be a requirement for an efficient collection system. So the proposal is to apply a benchmarking mechanism, which would be basically family groups. So you would be teamed up with, if you like, another local authority that had similar demographics. And then you would be paid based on the tonnages and quality of packaging recycling that you collected and recycled. There may be incentives for higher performers, but also, importantly, support for lower performers. And there's proposals to reinvest unallocated payments to help those that have challenges, for example, urban authorities like ourselves. The costs that will be paid will be net of income from the sale of recycling, and the payments are likely to be made a year in arrears. But as I say, we don't know how the costs are going to be split at the moment. In terms of the litter payments, there's very little detail on how that will work. However, it is likely to be linked to cleanliness standards, and it's likely that you would need some sort of litter management strategy to show that you are trying to deal with your litter in an efficient and cost-effective way. The payments for businesses, there's 3 proposals: per tonne payment administered by a single body, per tonne payment administered by a compliance scheme, or a free bin where all businesses are entitled to a free collection of packaging waste. Through the consultation, an alternative option 4 came about through local authorities basically wanting to put their view forward in terms of what they think might work better, and that would operate along the lines of a free bin system from small and micro businesses, but with the option for larger businesses to join this. In terms of funding for communications, it's mentioned as a necessary cost, but again, we don't know what that would look like, whether it would have to be a national scheme. But one thing that is clear is that it's likely to follow certain criteria. For example, there's a scheme called the OPRL, which is basically trying to standardise definitions of what can and can't be recycling in a simple way, so there's not multiple labels across stuff. The data reporting required, again, we don't know what this is going to look like, but it's probably going to be something similar to what there's something called the waste disposal waste data flow that we have to submit, and it's likely that it will follow the same lines. There's a number of issues. As I said, don't know what it means in terms of a cost-effective and efficient service, but it could potentially have impacts here, for example, in terms of possible collection day changes, because it might be that collecting all 3 waste streams on the same day isn't necessarily the most efficient way of operating it. Also potentially on side waste and contamination policies. Also, it's not clear, as I said, about the cost, but in particular, certain costs are not mentioned. For example, costs associated with any procurement you might have to undertake, costs associated, we talked about it earlier, about any waste compositional analysis that you might need to do, or possibly transitional costs for service changes. We don't know how that would work. The timescale proposed is obviously really, really tight, so there is an issue in terms of that. There's also no mention at all of enforcement, which you would obviously need for higher compliance rates. In terms of the drinks return scheme, it's basically paid for by the drinks container industry, and it's essentially what we used to have on some containers. For example, lemonade, where you had to you took back the bottle top and you got a refund. It's a similar sort of concept. There's a number of ways of which they are talking about how this would actually work. So one of them is that retailers would have to take them back and give them a deposit. Another one is a return, it's a reverse vending machine that would be on the streets or other areas where people would get their money back, or possibly through curbside services. This is based on a collection, not a recycling target. It would be regulated by the Environment Agency, but the retailer's compliance would be overseen by the local authority trading standards. The materials in scope are plastic bottles, glass, steel, aluminium, HDPE bottles, beverage cartons, sachets and pouches are excluded, which will present issues potentially in terms of contamination. The disposable cups are part of the EPR. In terms of the proposals, there were sort of numerous ways of, that they were consulting on, whether it includes different size containers, multi-packs, whether it would be on the go, so sort of trying to target containers that are largely that people are having when they're out and about, or whether it is predominantly that people are consuming in their homes. The view that was coming back from most local authorities is that it should be operated by a single not-for-profit organisation, and the options for the containers that are picked up by the curbside are do nothing, that we would get payments by the DMO, where the materials appears in our waste streams, or that there's a hybrid where basically the DMO, sorry, that's the organisation that would operate it, would give a value to containers that are returned and any additional scheme material in our waste streams. There's a number of issues with this, that there is the impact analysis makes a correlation between the reduction in litter and the cost savings for street cleansing, which is slightly dangerous because you can't necessarily scale back cleansing just because certain amount a waste stream is reduced or removed, because the cleansing is all about distance travelled and other parameters that they don't necessarily correlate. There will be an impact potentially on local authority trading standards officers. How would that work in terms of the reverse vending machines on the street in a congested pavements in urban areas? How is that realistic? There's concern that queries, complaints will be directed back to us about the machines breaking, for example, when we wouldn't have any control over that. The reporting requirements are not clear. Again, there's issues with storage, because if retailers have to take them back and they have no storage, where are they going to put them? Also, I think particularly relevant to areas with deprivation, what is termed bin diving might become an issue, where people basically scavenge in bins to get containers of value. Other issues, that is that if the material is diverted out of the local authority streams, how does that work in terms of our recycling rate commitments to the mayor? It's not clear about how that would work. Also, in terms of the material value loss to MRF, so obviously gate fees are based on a basket of materials, which they work out what the gate fee is according to the material value of each material stream. If that's going to change, how is that going to impact on our gate fees? Shopping habits have changed. How are residents going to store up items, between visits to the shop? They might not even be going to the shop. And just, it was raised, but Public Health said this probably wasn't an issue in terms of COVID and the cleanliness of vending machines. So the last one, the consistency in household and business recycling, it's linked to the other two. Again, the start date is 2023. Basically, the main aim of this is to make recycling collections across England more consistent. It's going to focus on the range of materials that we collect, as well as the design of the systems. And there is some mention of frequency and charging. For businesses, the proposals extend to making the segregation of certain recyclable materials mandatory. The scope of materials for this is glass bottles and jars, paper, card, excluding disposable cups, plastic bottles, and pots, tubs, trays, metal drinks and food cans. There is talk of additional materials, which would be aluminium foil trays and tubes, aerosols, jar and bottle lids, cartons, plastic films, and they're seeking views on transitional measures and barriers to enable those additional materials to be included. But that they would envisage there being a number of tests that would have to be met before they could include those additional materials, for example, on weed, textiles and batteries, making sure that there is a market and processing capability. So the preference under proposed within the consultation is a multi-stream approach, i.e. Collecting separately where possible. As it stands at the moment, there is already something called TEEP, which was introduced some years ago to try and look at the impacts, basically, of the way that materials are collected, to understand which was the most economically and environmentally practical way of collecting. So the preference is that they are collected separately, and the consultations talk about, I guess, renewing that TEEP test to understand where local authority is collecting. Is it the best way of collecting? The TEEP never really came to anything when it was introduced because it wasn't really enforced. So local authorities weren't really burdened in terms of justifying or doing extensive modelling on the way that they were collecting to meet the requirements. As I say, it was quite straightforward before to demonstrate, but one of the things that perhaps before you could, for example, show, so for example, a block of flats, is it realistic in an urban area to have multiple bins for multiple different materials? Possibly not. and that could be quite straightforward to demonstrate that before. As being uneconomically viable in terms of all the different containers, you wouldn't have the storage. This consultation, there are funding streams available as part of something called the new burdens, which I'll talk about in a minute. So some of the reasons that could have been discounted in the past, for example, not being economically viable, may not necessarily hold up moving forward. They talk about minimum service standards, including frequency. However, they haven't defined what that should look like. One thing that is covered in quite a lot of extent is the food waste. The Environment Bill already requires that there will be at least weekly separate collections. The proposals include flats. There's a number of questions about how that's going to work. In terms of, again, just where would the containers go, contamination, etc. The requirement would be introduced in 2023-24, and that you would have to have collections in place by 2024-25. It's expected to be treated by AD rather than IVC or MBT, which isn't an issue for us because that's already the case with us. The county liners will be promoted as good practice, but unlikely to be a requirement. There are likely to be capital funding available for investment costs, i.e. bins and vehicles, but we don't know what the funding might be for ongoing operational costs. In terms of garden waste, it's a bit complicated, this one, because obviously there's a lot of authorities that already operate a chargeable service, around 2/3. So the consultation talks about the possibility of the removal of charges, and that could be done in a number of ways, but it doesn't define what that will look like and what authorities will have to do currently. There is some talk about possibly using a wrap cost, which is, I think, between, from memory, 18 to around £30 for the charge as a sort of benchmark cost, but they are seeking views on whether authorities would want to do that or not. It talks about promoting home composting again, although the views from local authorities is that perhaps this is already saturated, and I'm not sure how much more that could be promoted. There's a little bit on MRF regulations, just about making sure that there's more frequent and robust audits, better guidance on target materials. This is likely to link into the EPR regulations. In terms of businesses, it's the same scope of materials apart from garden waste, and the same time scales apart from a shorter transition for plastic film and possibly food waste. Again, there's the idea is that the separate streams is the preference, and also again that there would need to be some sort of TEEP assessment that would be undertaken by the waste collector, but with input from the producer. There's proposals for exemption on micro firms less than 10 FTE, and that possibly businesses can group up together to have a collaborative approach. There's proposals for franchising and zoning, possibly being operated by us in terms of the admin, and again combining household and business collections for efficiencies. They also talk about drop-off sites as well. I think something that has come out of this is that for urban areas like ourselves, where particularly you've got SMEs in an area with diverse communities, that this is going to be quite onerous for businesses who may have absolutely no idea what is in their waste stream, let alone undertake a formal TEEP assessment of that. So it could be difficult and challenging. The new burdens funding that I mentioned, this is about, there's a commitment to fund the net additional cost of local authorities in line of any new statutory duties placed on them in line with the new burdens guidance. It's defined as a change in a central government policy or initiative that imposes a net cost on the local government and could lead to an increase in council tax. There's a commitment to fund additional capital items, as I've mentioned, like vehicles, containers. But again, we don't know what are the ongoing operational costs, refunds, if you like, might look like. Other proposals in there about consulting on non-binding targets and carbon-based metrics, abolishing recycling credits, They talked about standardising bin colour, but that's been abandoned. And there's a bit of wording on communication and implementation, but not very much. So obviously, as I've already said tonight, we know that our contract expires in 2025. As part of the service review, which is starting imminently, we will need to look at the sort of viability of the options for commissioning moving forward. And as part of that, the changes that may result from this will need to feed into that. But it's very early days, and whilst, as I said, the timeframe is very tight, this is all the information we have at the moment. So there's so many unanswered questions that it's very difficult to accurately portray what the waste landscape will look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else?
Loves out of that, I think, probably.
Well, if you could ask the question, I'm a little bit concerned that our contract with Veolia expires in 2025, as we said previously. But these changes could actually, by the sounds of things, come in 2023. So when I asked the previous question about whether we were thinking at the moment about separating out our waste, specifically with regard to paper and cardboard, and I understand the substitutes done in bags, so maybe they have paper bags that they then just collect. Should we not be looking at it? And I fully appreciate how, in terms of officer time as well. So I do appreciate the difficulties. But if it suddenly landed on us before 2025, we're going to need to think about this now. We can't really be waiting to assume that it's only going to come in later, because it could become very expensive for us if we have to do something we haven't started preparing for enough in advance. So, what are we doing to prepare for it if it is to come in 2023? We can't be waiting. We can't be. It seems like we've got a deadline of when there's a deadline of when the new contract is going to come in, if there's a new contract, when the Veolia contract comes to an end. But this might actually happen before that, from what you said.
Yes, you're right. Obviously, we do need to prepare for it, and we have started some work in sort of modelling we always have work ongoing in terms of modelling our waste streams and what by individual waste stream that looks like. As I mentioned, I think earlier, there was a composition study done some time ago, and that needs to be refreshed, because ultimately, until we know what's in the waste, we don't even know what we're dealing with. So obviously that needs to be done. I think this is work on a wider scale because it needs to link into our NRWA and the other boroughs, because obviously we have an arrangement where we share facilities. So we have already started the conversations on that. I think in terms of the fact that Veolia's contract will still be running, but the changes come in before that, what I would say is that Veolia have been very flexible to date, where we have had to make changes on vehicle types and methodology, and the partnership has served us well in that purpose of being able to have that flexibility. So we've already spoken to Veolia. They're obviously a huge company that are looking at this themselves and understanding the implications and planning how they might be able to adapt with their contracts.
Thank you. So going back to the paper and cardboard, I'm sorry, this is a particularly bad way of mine. Sorry. So going back to the paper and cardboard, would it not be worth us looking and speaking to Veolia? Because as I said, what they found, I appreciate that it's complicated, because the Staffordshire is not urban in the same way. We know that there's been a huge increase in paper and card because of deliveries. So we know that in actual fact, we're collecting more paper and card than we used to, a substantial amount more. But if that paper and card is then becoming contaminated because it's being collected with glass, it could actually really save us a lot of money if we are able to collect clean paper and glass. So, I mean, clean paper that isn't contaminated. And although, you know, it might, you know, in terms of the fact that it might be coming in anyhow, it just might be something that we kind of start with, so that I certainly know in terms of my household waste since lockdown. Before it used to be, you know, plastic containers was most of my waste, some paper and cardboard. But now, because of the number of deliveries that I get, far more of it is paper and cardboard. So, and I'm sure that I am just an example of probably most households or a lot of households. So, and that's borne out by the fact that we know that we're collecting so much more. So it would be good if we could cost it, because it might be that it's something that we can bring in advance that takes out quite a lot of what we're recycling at the moment.
Yeah, no, I completely take your points on board. I think, we are starting to look at this. I think until I understand what you're saying, that we need to plan, but until we know exactly how they're going to specify, because it may not even be acceptable to collect paper and card together. So we need to understand where the direction is coming from before we sort of go down one route. And obviously, the main costs involved are vehicles. And currently, the way that we collect, we only have 2 compartments on the vehicles. You can get multiple compartment vehicles, obviously, but then you've got to weigh up the whole thing of, you know, the extra journeys and where they're going to different processing points. And so you have to look at it as a whole, as opposed to trying to isolate out one or 2 materials. So I think, yes, we need to do some more work on it, but it needs to be looked at as a whole.
Does anybody have any other comments about
Really, just an observation, Chair. I think I'm extremely sympathetic towards Betsy and her colleagues, because they've got a huge task ahead of them without a great deal of certainty. And it's really, really hard to plan for something which could come in as soon as 18 months or 2 years' time without having any degree of certainty. To take just one example, if the government are going to insist that food waste is collected separately from flats above shops in our high streets, how on earth are you going to plan manage that? It does sound both very difficult and very costly. And unless you know for sure that you've got to do it, and for sure that you might get some extra money to enable you to do it, it's a pretty hard task. So it's just an observation, but I think it's a very difficult position that you're in, and you have my sympathy for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Hubert, can I bring you in?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on what Ian said. This isn't the first time such schemes have been mooted in the past. So, as Beth said, we really do need to keep a close eye on it to see how things go and see whether the proposal actually develops. But no, this isn't the first time it has happened in its cycle. So yeah, so Ian is spot on, and yes, it will take a lot of Beth's time really to try and work this through. Thank you.
Thank you. Albert?
I don't know if you're aware, but long distance lorry drivers have recently, their rates have shot up and they're earning some mega bucks. Do you think the drivers of our waste carts will go into long distance driving, and hence we'll have another shortage of drivers and no collection pickups?
So I have, so earlier I was talking about that we are seeing the impacts of this already. So we have 7 vacancies currently on the contract for drivers. And I think, if I'm honest, that the situation is going to get more challenging before it gets better, because this is a long-term, this is a national issue that isn't obviously just affecting us, it's affecting retail, it's affecting all businesses that require HGV drivers. And as I said, we are fortunate in comparison to some other local authorities. For example, I know of one who's got 40 vacancies for HGV drivers, and they've had to suspend services completely. But we are trying to tackle this with Veolia, and they have done together we have done a number of initiatives to try and recruit more drivers in partnership with How and Gay Works. They've done recruitment days, they've done press releases, they've done using national press adverts to try and recruit staff, and they are sort of offering additional training to some of their loaders that might want to become drivers. So we are trying to address it, but yes, you're right, it is a challenge, and that, as I said earlier, was the reason for some of the issues that we are seeing on the service at the moment in terms of delays and increased miscollections.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you for that. Can we go on to the next item, which is new badging? In the scrutiny, previous scrutiny panel's recommendations.
Sorry, Chair, do you mind if Beth and myself are excused?
You absolutely may be excused.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I take the report as read, and it seems to me that most of the recommendations are complete. Certainly the ones that were agreed. And is there anything that you would like to draw our attention to on this?
Yeah, well, I think I am aware of some time pressures, but I think it is a positive story, and thank you very much for recognizing that. I think the most recent success is the implementation of the new Blue Badge case management system, and we've implemented that as part of the wider parking IT system. I think that's going to really make a shift change in terms of how people access that particular service and how we keep them updated. You know, it introduces a load of improvements, online payments, update on the various stages of the application process. It's a process that's not popular, but it is statutory, so we have to follow it. But we want to make it as easy for people as we can. The other issue that I thought was just interesting to point out is Scrutiny were a little bit concerned. I think on the back of introducing the dedicated disabled base, Scrutiny were a little bit concerned that we made sure that we retained a proper supply of what we tend to call generic disabled base, because some people won't qualify for the dedicated. And also you have people who need to visit, they need to visit places of interest. And then there's concerns that we're not getting rid of redundant bays quick enough. So we've moved to what we call map-based traffic management orders, which is far more efficient. We'll have a visual display of where all of our traffic and parking restrictions are, which means that information that we held before but was very fragmented, it was really difficult to wade through. We will now be able to get our infrastructure up to date. So where we have got redundant bays, because we can simply compare to where we've got people who've got disabled permits. So we'll be able to bring it up to scratch quicker, and then, we'll be starting on a different playing field. And it'll probably also allow us to respond quicker when people want us to remove them in the future. So I think there's quite a few positive, but in view of time constraints, I'd rather give you time for questions rather than me kind of repeat the report as it is written in many respects.
Does anybody have any questions?
Before I start off with questions, Anne, good evening, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I want to place on record my thanks to your team, because you know that we had an issue with a lady and a gentleman in Fenton Road. Both of them had disabled bays, and the gentleman died, and his bay was reallocated to the son. And we put a temporary stop notice on the bay to make sure that no tickets were being issued until they transferred over, and that was great. The lady concerned is moving, unfortunately. She's selling her place, but she was really pleased. So I wanted to place on record my thanks to the team. I think it was a really good piece. You made the point about the redundant bays, and I'm sure I saw something in the report that's made some suggestions about how that could be addressed in terms of a database of where bays were and how you, when they're redundant. what was I'm sure that there was a suggestion that you weren't able to do what review said. So can you just?
So we have got the database now. We've got our new system, but sometimes it's like when I think people want definite timelines by which we'll remove bays, and that presents challenges. Sometimes we can do it, sometimes we can't, because believe it or not, we get so many challenges to this is quite emotive. Taking away a bay or putting a bay in it can even generate conflict between neighbours, to be quite honest. So we sometimes have to overcome many obstacles where we would get objections, and we would need to kind of, negotiate with the objectors to actually find a way forward, which means that at times it's very hard to say we will remove this bay within 6 weeks or within 2 months, because it depends on what we're dealing with. So we do naturally try and we deal with them in batches, because the statutory consultation has got costs associated with it. So even with that caveat, it's hard for us to have a standard to say, if you want a bay removed, we'll do it within 8 weeks, because we don't know what we're going to encounter as part of that process. I think that's the point I was making in the report, is that we'll respond as quickly as possible, but we've got one case in Langham Road, and I think it's been going on for 4 or 5 months, to be quite honest. So that's just an example of where it's not straightforward. Have I got the right point, Councillor Bowler? Is there another point you're referring to in the report?
No, I think that's okay. I
Yes.
just want to tease out from you a little bit about companion badges, because it wasn't clear from the report whether that was something that we were continuing with, and if we are, whether they're going to be virtual. Before you answer, I'm a big fan, Chair, of companion badges. I think they're the step way forward. I've got a particular I like to use the word recidivist because I'm a lover of porridge. That's a word I picked up from porridge. It's a great word. We've got some serious recidivists in Rivulet Road. We've had a huge problem with blue badge theft there. And my concern, and I've raised this with Councillor Chandwani, what more can we do to communicate to residents about the fact that we have a companion badge scheme? Because we have residents that are really frightened about having their blue badges stolen, and they're not aware of the companion badge scheme. So what can we do to educate and communicate that more to residents? I think that would be a really good step forward. Can you help me with that?
Of course I can, yes. Well, what we plan to do with the introduction of the new IT system was move to the virtual, I think we called it my colleague Tim is with me, so if I'm using the wrong terminology, he'll correct me. We were to move to a virtual permit, but what we had intended doing, and what we've done for now, is that we limited that to the home CPZ. So you had your virtual permit and you could park anywhere within your home CPZ. And quite frankly, that's kind of what Islington and Hackney does. They originally had a companion badge and they moved, because the companion badge is very popular, but how shall I put it? It's not without the risk and the actual incidents of abuse as well. So we're trying to manage a situation. But anyway, so since we've introduced that virtual CPZ for the homes, virtual permit for the home CPZs, we've actually had a very, very significant increase in the uptake of those. Now we've listened to people saying, well, actually being restricted to my home CPZ isn't enough. I need to be borough-wide. So we are extending it borough-wide. But we just have to go through a legal process to do that, our statutory consultation. So probably I can't give you an exact I've just come back from leave today, so I haven't caught up as to where we're at with it, but probably by the end of October, we probably will have it borough-wide, unless Tim's able to tell me something else. So we did it on the home CPZ, all virtual, really good take-up. But people have said it's not enough. We want, we want it borough-wide, and we're doing that. Now, we will have to balance that to make sure that we're not kind of going to increase abuse. And we've got some mechanisms planned to do that in the near future. So hopefully that's on. So we won't be calling it a companion badge anymore. We'll be calling it I think we're calling it a disabled parking permit. But it'll grant the same concessions. We don't want to use, what we're planning at the moment and what we consult on is prohibiting use of it on the yellow lines, because the yellow lines is, kind of, you're not meant to be parking. And even though blue badge holders can, we don't want, we'd rather have as little people as possible parking on the yellow lines.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's kind of, that's covered your concerns.
Just one more, Chair, if I may. You know that one of the roads in my ward is a red route. It's the Great Cambridge Road. And you know, we had a resident there.
I know that resident. Can't remember his name for the.
For having
Yeah.
a complaint badge from, because it's in the TFL at the same time. Can you just make sure that when we make these changes, that we do liaise with TFL, because this guy was pouring his heart out to me. He kept getting ticketed and kept having to
Yeah, they were a bit naughty, to be honest, because we had told them several times. But you know, it's like every organisation, people change and knowledge goes with them. So yes, but can you remind me of his name? Every time you mention it, I write his name down.
I'm not going to say it on here, don't worry, because you and I, we're old school. We don't remember.
You tell me by email so that I can make sure that I contact the individual as well, so that he knows. Yeah, so you let me know that, and we'll sort out all the practicalities.
I'll contact them. Thanks, Don. You almost got me. I almost got in trouble there, Anne.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I should have said send it by email.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm done, Donna. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I mean, thank you. I think that one of the indications of the success of this is that when I first became a counsellor, I did get casework to do with blue badges. And I don't know when I last, I haven't had one recently, anything to do with blue badges, which means that everything's running very smoothly.
Well, it's good to get positive information, good positive feedback. It's not something with the nature of my services I'm always in receipt of. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That's great. If we could go on to the next report, please, which is on page. Yeah. I think it's. Are we on item 11?
We are indeed, Chair. I believe it's the parking transformation programme.
Yes. Yeah, parking transformation. Anne, parking transformation. How are we doing? Would you like to? Again, I will take this read. If you could tell us how it's going with the new operating model, and generally, if you could just give us an update, a very brief update on the law.
Yes, I'm happy. Now, we had got some additional information on the IT system, which we're happy to share or not, as the case may be, whichever you would like. I mean, the parking, I think we're doing very well with the parking transformation in its entirety. It was a very large program, obviously just an accelerated improvement program that was branded as a transformation. We've needed to be flexible, so it's grown. So when we originally started, it's about 3 years ago, it was a defined program. It's grown. We've made good progress on each. We've mentioned the map-based orders already. That was one of the programs. The new operating model, I'm very pleased to say that we're at the recruitment stage, because that is when you grow a service, you need to grow the resources to make sure that we're actually delivering what we say we're going to do in the first place. And it's a significant growth. So I'm one of the very fortunate people within the council that I'm growing a service as opposed to reshaping it and possibly, reducing. So that's at the recruitment stage at the moment. We've made some appointments, and the rest are in the, we're just doing it stage by stage. We have completed when I say we've completed a review of parking policy. This is not something that ever stands still. It's something that we're continually looking at, continuing reviewing. But we have implemented some additional measures on the permit front to encourage the uptake of more sustainable modes of transport and, less polluting vehicles. So we've got a diesel surcharge that's recently been implemented, as well as a surcharge on second and subsequent permits per household, because we are, as a borough, we've got our transport strategy, and one of the objectives there was to actually use parking as a tool to help achieve some of the outcomes. So we've got that, but I'm sure there'll be further reviews that we would be taking back at some stage. We've mentioned all the access to disabled parking services, many which were steered by Scrutiny, and a few additional ones. I'm very pleased, and indeed I think some of your colleagues outside of Scrutiny as well might be pleased to hear that we've got contactless parking. It took us a little while to get here with the contactless parking, but we've got 101 outlets or terminals, whichever we'd like to call them, in operation across the borough. So we naturally want to evaluate, see what the take-up is, and then use that information to inform whether we need a further expansion or whether what we've got is adequate. So all is doing quite well. The element that is probably most interesting is, of course, the IT system. And that's what Tim was going to talk about, if you would like. We are live with phase 1 and phase 2. I'm inclined to say it's going very well. I know some of our users have had some issues that we are resolving, and I think through communication, everything seems to be going much smoother. Tim might like to come in to give some update on that in the last 3 weeks. But we have got a further stage. We've got a phase 3, which is also quite important, but it's it won't be affecting the bulk of our residents as much. I mean, the permit one was the biggest change because it's the one that we really wanted, because we wanted to improve how our residents access our services. The system we had, it worked. I'm not going to deny it worked, but it was clunky and it wasn't the most modern. When we started this project years ago, we wanted to future-proof, because changing IT systems in parking is quite painful and is quite costly. So we wanted to set the bar quite high so that we do it now and we don't have to do it for another 8 or 9 years. And we've done it, and it's not been easy, but I think we are on way to getting the outcomes we want. So I'm quite positive about it. I do know that we'll have some individual residents that might have a different view, but all in all, when we weigh it up, it's quite positive. And there are a few residual issues that are being resolved, which is what Tim might want to talk about, or he's very silent at the moment, so he might not. So, Chair, we are in your hands. We either make Tim talk or we don't.
I am here.
The problem, as Tim says, when I start talking and I go on for a long time, so, Chair, it depends on the level of detail you want.
If Tim could update us on the IT system, because I think that is very useful for us.
Just before we go, I haven't heard of contactless. The contactless parking. What exactly is it?
I presume it's machines, but instead of putting money in, you just
you just tap the card.
Oh, I see.
So you don't have to have an app.
It's a really good idea.
But so is your card related to your car?
No, you just.
Debit card.
Sorry?
Your debit card. So
debit card.
cash. Content.
Right. Okay.
You still put in your reg number though, I should think. I'm sure you can update us.
Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
If Tim could tell us how the IT system's going, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, of course, there is a slide deck, so I'll take you through the slide deck. I'm quite happy to pause if people want to ask questions on each slide. I do apologise in advance, Chair. I've got a bit of a reputation for going on and on for things that have been quite innovative, so please feel free to hurry me along, which I will do. So I'll just share the slide deck. As I said, I can be stopped for questions or take questions at the end, if that's okay.
Questions at the end, please. Yes, at the end we will take questions at the end.
Okay. So there's a little slide deck here that hopefully people can see.
Yes.
Okay. So the IT system, it was always designed as what's being described here as a system enabler. So it's at the core of many other work streams that are dependent on the IT system working. So fortunately, all of the original objectives and plans are being realized. So all of these particular work streams that rely on the IT system being at the core of that are able to do what we envisaged in terms of receiving data or transmitting data. So obviously, as the text refers to, there was a particular point about the longevity of this system. Good news is we've had, it has been very difficult at times, but suffice to say now, particularly with phase 2, which is the permits part of the project, we're getting full cooperation from the supplier, which for me at least gives some confidence that the longevity of the 10 years is something that we got right. Okay, so we put in a lot of innovative features into the product. So as you'll see a bit later on, some of the key changes were automatic validation. to speed up the application process, in particular with permits. So I'll talk a little bit later on and take questions around automatic validation. So that's essentially using known data to the council, particularly around the council tax register and the electoral register. So where we can do auto validation, we're doing that. At the time we tendered the contract, no other London council was doing the automatic validation around council tax or electoral register. So we've led the field in this respect, and it's working as intended at the moment, which is good news. The whole system is based on virtuality. So Councillor Bull referred to the virtualization of the companion badge. So the permit that Anne described to replace that is all virtual, as are all of the other permits that the council offers. So there's a workflow management system at the heart of this system. So I had a quick look before the meeting, and at the moment it spans everything, every single module. So just to give you some idea about the scale of the project, there's 27 different modules to this system. 27 different modules. I think Civica had about 3 or 4. And there's a very, very good workflow management system, which gives you an overview of all of those work streams that I touched upon on the last slide. So managers with the sufficient level of authority can see how workflow looks across the whole system and all of those workflow streams. We intend to introduce ANPR enforcement a little bit later this year. So we're on target to realise that. So happy to take questions at the end around ANPR enforcement if people have them, and some further work to enhance the ability for us to carry out remote briefings to CEOs. So essentially looking at more intelligent-led deployment. The architecture of the system is quite complex, as this slide shows. So essentially we're reliant on APIs into third-party suppliers, such as some of the suppliers mentioned here, whether it's London tribunals, the DFT. So we're reliant on an API into the DFT Blue Badge database to allow our Blue Badge case management system to work. And again, it was quite challenging to do the testing and to get this up and running. But looking at all of the interfaces and the suppliers that we are utilizing at the moment, it has been a difficult path to tread, but a successful one nonetheless. So just that we use an API into the electoral register, and for permit validations against the LLPG and council tax, we take a cut of that. We take a cut of the data and we supply that to TSL as the supplier of the system. Okay, the program timetable. So enforcement went live on the 6th of April. We've had no major issues around enforcement. Permits went live on the 2nd of August, and it's exactly as Anne has described, that there have been cases where individual residents have had problems, and we are now seeing less problems manifesting themselves, which is really good news. That's not to say that some residents are still not having problems, because they are, but both the volume of instances that we are getting are reducing, and the overall contact into the system in terms of people's reporting problems is reducing as well. We have the phase 3 of the project, which is about exactly what it says on the slide: suspension, skip licensing, and the ANPR that I spoke about. At the time the slides were prepared, we were looking at November, but we're in discussion with the supplier around this particular date to ascertain whether the modules in question can go live, or whether we need to revise some of the timelines around that. So just to make you aware of that. And it's really illustrating our experience to date. It's consistent that this is, all of these things have been hugely complex to deliver. And the suspension in and the licensing is just, if not more complex than some of the other things that we've already done to date. So this is a flavour of what we have done. So as I said, we've got the enforcement and permits live. We've interfaced into third-party systems. We have done a complete refresh of all the CEO equipment out on streets. That's new handheld computers, new printers. All of that equipment is proving to be reliable and very robust. So that's very good news. We've integrated into the council's council tax system. We use the electoral register as well for data validation. We've done some work which is including added new CCTV locations. We're doing work around the recovery rate at the moment. We changed all of our documentation. Hasn't been any problems with that. We've done lots of communications for residents, depending on which permits they hold. So quite a lot of communication around blue badges, case management system. Okay, part of the project involved updating all of the council's website and web pages. So we looked at what people were telling us, and we looked at the content of the website, and we made quite significant changes to the website, and trying to make the actual journey, whether that's for people that already have a permit and need to renew that permit, which is typically on the new system, or whether people are new to the borough and taking out a permit from scratch. So we've looked at that and tried to make the website as clear and as user-friendly as possible. For the enforcement piece, this is just showing some year-on-year comparisons in terms of our overall issue rate. I mean, it gives an overview, but clearly, there are things that influence the number of tickets being issued, like the seasons of the year and weather and all of those things. So I think you'd have to drill down quite significantly to understand particular aspects of that. But you can see overall that we carry on maintaining the same level of enforcement or thereabouts. Okay, a little bit of information regarding PCNs and how people challenge and make representations against those PCNs. What the new system does allow us to do, it allows people to contact the council about a PCN at any stage. So this was quite an innovation on our part. So prior to us going live on the 6th of April, if you wanted to contact the council about a PCN, you could only do so online at a particular stage, the early stages of the PCN. You couldn't, for example, contact the council when your case had gone to enforcement agents, or you were getting more formal notices at the latter stage of the process. So we completely turned that on its head, and suffice to say, it doesn't matter now what stage your PCN is at. If you have online access, you can make contact about that PCN at any stage of the PCN life cycle. I guess an obvious question is, what's the split between people going online and making challenges, which is easier for them and it's easier for us and it's less costly. So what's the split between doing that and people writing to a PO box and that correspondence being scanned into the system? And it's hugely weighted in favor of the online. So where people are making challenges against PCN, yeah, there are very, very few occasions in relation to the number of tickets being issued where people make a written representation. So that further, enforces the view that opening up the communication challenge, no matter at what stage you receive the PCN, is going to carry on, helping people to either challenge a PCN or ask for information about the PCN. So a little bit of information about the council's recovery rate, because improving our recovery rate is an absolutely key objective. So in terms of the equipment out on street that the civil enforcement officers use, it gives much better evidence gathering ability. So it's better photographs, better notes, everything that you need to support the actual contravention. Now these figures, so what I would say here is lots of councils calculate their recovery rate in different ways. So what we're doing with these figures is we're bringing it into line with certainly some of our neighbours and what a lot of councils do. So and that's if you take out the number of cancellations, because people will make legitimate challenges and those tickets will be cancelled, and quite rightly so. So if you look at the number of tickets without cancellations, then these figures are quite encouraging at the moment in terms of what recovery is. And given that we only went live on the 6th of April, and the PCN has a life cycle of around about 18 months, then these figures are quite encouraging at the moment. But as I said, I'll just caveat that with there's lots of different ways you can report on recovery rate. And at the moment, this slide is showing recovery by taking out the cancellations. Obviously, if you were to add those in, then your overall figures would dip a little bit. So if we go on to the permitting part of the system, which went live on the 2nd of August, we've done some analysis just to make sure the system is behaving itself and we're not experiencing an unexpected downturn in the number of permit applications. So all this slide is doing is basically saying what were we reasonably expecting in terms of people that had a Civica permit expiring last month, and whether the figures we were seeing through the new system were consistent with the expiry of old Civica permits. And the answer to that is yes, they are. So where people's permits are expiring, the majority of people are going on to renew, take out a new permit on Taranto. So this was really something we did to alleviate any concerns or worries on the part of seeing a dip in numbers on Taranto, and we're not seeing that at all, fortunately. So that's quite encouraging, that the numbers we're seeing coming through in terms of people's applications. Next one is, this gives you a flavour for the different types of permits that we've issued. So across the whole piece with resident permits and residents as event day zone permits being the vast majority of permits that we've issued. We've done 66 of the replacement to the companion badge. That was the permit that Anne was talking about a little bit earlier. And we've got something like another 100 waiting. So the take up, as Anne says, has been very, very encouraging around this. So notwithstanding the changes that we need to make that Anne spoke about, I think the switch from the companion badge to this new free resident blue badge holder permit has been, particularly successful. And then what is also significant here, the permission to park is a new type of permit. So that's available to outer borough landlords, for example, that have got tradespeople coming at potentially short notice, where they just need to allow that particular tradesperson to park. So it's open to both in borough and outer borough. So again, something quite new. 273 is again quite encouraging in the number of people going onto the system and buying that. So there's no restriction in terms of living in the borough on that one. So that's that's been quite well received and quite popular with people. Right. So a key part of the new system was auto validation. So auto validation helps streamline the process. So if I was a person taking my permit out on Civica, I would have to upload proof of residency. So that could be copy of my council tax bill, it could be a tenancy agreement, etc., etc. With the auto validation, the system looks via, as I said, either a data cut or an API to both the council's electoral register and also the council's council tax register. And if you're on either or both of those databases, then there is no requirement for you to upload any proof of residency as part of your permit application. Unfortunately, it would have been nice to auto-validate people's vehicle ownership as well, because you have to upload proofs of vehicle ownership, but that isn't something that the DVLA allows councils or any other party to do at the moment. So we have no alternative other than to ask people to upload a copy of their logbook or the V5 document, as it's affectionately called. I think the key to this is the figures show that over 2,000 resident permits have been auto-validated. So there's no back office intervention needed in any size, shape or form for those permits that are auto-validated. So it's 2,000 people that had their permit issued straight away at the point of application, no waits, no waiting for validation at all. And the other way of looking at this is it's saved back office resource in the fact that it's 2,000 fewer permits that somebody in the back office in customer services have had to look at. And then on the resident qualification, obviously to get visitor permits, then you have to be a Haringey resident. So again, we try and auto-validate people to allow them to go on straight onto the system and buy visitor parking. So again, the numbers are quite encouraging and quite healthy. So I hope that was succinct enough. Happy to take questions now on any or all of that.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and yes, succinct enough. And it does seem, from the number of, as you said, the number of people who were auto-validated, that that system seems to now be working quite well, because I think that's excellent news. Certainly the way to go forward. The easier that we make it for people to pay and to pay up front, the fewer people will actually get parking fines as well, because they should, we want them, ideally we want them to pay for the permit. Does anybody else have any questions regarding this?
Yeah, just two questions. So good evening and thank you for that. On page 109, I don't know if you've got the page number of your presentation, but it's improving the customer journey, and it shows you a pie chart from over a year ago about customer feedback on using the parking web pages, which, as you can see, the huge majority, over 3/4 of the respondents, found it to be either extremely or very difficult, which is clearly totally unacceptable. I presume that you have now completely, judging by what you said, revamped those pages. And so I equally presume that you will be about to launch a similar consultation, which will hopefully produce much better results. That was my first point. And the second one was just, a question and an observation. On the number of PCNs, the number issued has gone up month by month from April to August this year. I expect, given the increase in coming out of COVID and lockdown and whatever. So that seems entirely logical. The one figure in that chart that seems somewhat counterintuitive is that the number of challenges has also gone up month by month, exactly as you would expect, except in August, when it suddenly plummeted. So the number of actual PCNs issued has continued to rise, but there's a sudden, and I would have thought, unexpected drop in the number of challenges. So those are my two questions. Yeah, I suppose it could be.
Okay, so on the first point, of course, it absolutely makes sense to go back to people and see what their experience of using the new system is. I guess it's sensible to wait until people get used to using it. And I think with these things, what people are very good at is telling you about all of the problems that they've had, but they're not so keen on coming forward and saying if they've had a positive experience or not. But certainly we need to reach out to people and ask them what their experience of the new system is. I mean, in relation to different matters, I'm out on the street some of the time, and I have spoken to individual residents, and those residents that I have spoken to have been very positive in terms of the fact that they can get their permit straight away now. And as the chair has quite rightly pointed out, there was a lag before in terms of I need to wait until all my documents are checked and approved. And in that intervening period, which could be, anywhere between 5 and 10 days, I'm at risk of receiving a penalty charge notice. So I think the system has been very well received in that respect, that people get their permit instantly. There are residents experience some problems, as Anne has said, and that we accept that. We're working through all of those problems. So I think when we've worked through some of the issues that still remain, then would be an appropriate time to reach out to people and find out, what they do think and how easy or how difficult is it to use the system. So I don't know whether Anne wants to add to that at all.
I don't think I need to be honest. I think that's comprehensive. Tim, Ian asked the second question about the volume of representations going down in August. And I'm not sure I've got an explanation for that, but you've been a bit closer.
Okay, so the only explanation I can provide at the moment is there'll be a lag between us issuing the PCN and people challenging. So there would have been a lot of activity on Civica leading up to August. Yeah. So people will have received Civica PCNs leading up to the go live, and those challenges would have been made on Civica. So those people that received penalty charge notices upon going live on the 6th of April with the enforcement piece, sorry, April, not August. So leading up to April, there would have been a lot of activity on Civica, and those challenges would have been made on Civica. When we went live with the new system on the 6th of April, then there would have been a lag in terms of people making those challenges. But we haven't seen any unusual system behavior or anything like that to account for it in any other way other than what I've described.
And I think just to add, it's I don't think the fluctuations in reps is system related. It's probably more related to the schemes that we were introducing at a given time, because we were quite ambitious and we did it, but we went live at about 13 school streets in 1 week. And that by the sheer nature of it it will generate additional reps in that given month. So it's more in link to what we'd be doing outside, in terms of our schemes, than it being a system issue.
Thank you.
If I could come in, thank you so much for that. If I could ask a question on this slightly, not exactly on the paper, but I've been asked to find out, is how do we decide on the amount and how do we decide on how much we charge for our permits? Do we benchmark against other local authorities? How do we come to the figures?
We do, to be honest, we do. We have, so a lot of our recent increases were just inflationary, but when we made a significant change, so for example, with the diesel surcharge or the second and subsequent, we would have benchmarked with other boroughs, and we'd have, through discussions internally at officers and then with our cabinet member, etc., we'd come up with something that we felt was appropriate for Haringey. So it would be within the range of charges being charged with comparative boroughs, which tend to be, not exclusively, but tend to be neighbouring boroughs. So yes, we do benchmark a lot.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
I will. I can't put my camera on, so that's it. I got it right. Yeah, that's great. And can I take you to page 100 in the report? And I just want to place on record, I think it's important as councillors that when we think things are good and officers behave well, we should praise them. So you've got a couple of officers in your team, Andy and Jack, who are really good on, I'm still trying to fine tune the White Hart Lane CPZ. And
Yes.
yeah, and the consultation's been good. We've been out on the doorstep talking to residents and encouraging them to participate. Just for the avoidance of doubt, in 4.6, can we just confirm that if in response to a consultation, residents in a CPZ give an overall view that they want the time scale back of the CPZ, that's something we always consider. We always ensure that we respond to residents. We don't have CPZs that just go this way. We can have situations where roads can be taken out of CPZs. Yes?
Yeah, theoretically, yes. I'm not sure we've ever done it, to be honest, but yes, you're right. So theoretically, you're right, but I can't remember when we've done it. And if a particular road wanted to come out of a CPZ, then we'd need to look at, is that a road on the periphery? Is it in the middle? You'd need to look at it in the round, because obviously if one road in the middle of the current CPZ decided they didn't want it anymore, we would be encouraging them not to do that, because it would become a giant car park, so theoretically, yes, you're right. It is led by residents, but there has to be a degree of I suppose the word I'm looking for is practicality involved in how we would do it. Yes.
I won't use the opportunity to raise case work, don't worry, but the roads in question of Devonshire Lane and Mayfair Gardens were still very much right at the top of the ward, on the border then. And the response from residents there has been very, very strong in terms of wanting to engage in the consultation. Can I encourage you in 4.9 to liaise with my excellent successor as the Cabinet Lead for Business to ensure that there's constant conversations going on with Diane Southam and other officers within Councillor Gordon's team about shopping thoroughfares that could benefit from contactless. And it's not just the main thoroughfares. Your team were very creative in taking away some of the loading bays on Lordship Lane near the old Welcome Inn pub and replacing them with bays to meet the requirements of the optometrists and other shops that are not part of the main thoroughfare area, but they're still the lifeline of that particular area. Where Tinton Road is in the so I want. Can you please ensure that you continue to liaise? Because contactless payment has been we're waiting ages for it to be on. It's a good way forward. I do have. It's a real shame on 4.12 that where are we at the moment with the contract with Wings on Homes for Haringey Estates? Or if you can't answer that, Councillor Carlin might be able to, because she sits on the board. Because I thought that with the contract's not been renewed, and I'm not quite sure where we are in terms of abandoned vehicles on Homes for Haringey Estates. Do you know?
Well, they're talking to.
Sorry, Anne, you can respond because you actually know something.
Yeah, well, they're talking to us about that at the moment. So we will be helping them at some point in the near future with the abandoned vehicles, as we will with all of with their parking arrangements. They're starting on a pilot basis, but they are rolling out. Their intention is to roll out controls under the TMA on all of their estates, I think, eventually, but on a trial basis. So we're working with them on the AVs, and we're working with them on the introduction of some new parking restrictions on their estates as well.
Two more questions, then I'm done. The first question is, we had a couple of Clever Clogs residents living on the Roundway. I thought it was quite a nice idea to go and park their cars on the green there. And now they've moved to Tallfield Avenue, they've covered them over. So I don't know if other councillors on this committee and elsewhere have had instances in their ward where someone tries to be smart, quite frankly, and avoid having a permit by covering their vehicle over. Because I think under the legislation, and Irene Rice confirmed this in an email, that our traffic wardens, I was still call them traffic wardens, I'm old school. They can't actually physically lift up the cover to see what the reg number is to make sure they've got a permit. What can you do?
Well, I think Irene's probably giving you some up to date. I thought we got legal advice years ago which said that we could. So I'd have to be careful in case I'm giving you wrong information at this point, because we have had a few people that do it, and we do have some in the town centres where they'll put their goods in front of the registration so you can't get at it. But we did overcome that. Mark's got his hand up. We did overcome that problem a while ago. So whether legislation has reverted, but Mark's better informed than I am on this.
Makes a change, Anne. Yeah, I'm aware, Councillor Bull, that there was a recent occasion where there was a problem with a car covered over with a sheet, and one of the senior officers within the parking service was able to go out, lift the cover quite legitimately and check. So it isn't a mechanism by which they can get around it. We can still check those cars, but it has to be a certain level of officer who's involved.
Yeah.
I'm going to indulge the chair because I said I had two, but I've still got two, and this is about illegal crossovers. We've got to review what our powers are on illegal crossovers. Councillor Mitchell and I have constantly raised the issue on both sides of our share of Gospatrick Road, where actually the amount of money it costs for someone to put an illegal crossover in, to put a drop curb in, is quite a lot. But the ability for us to find people that have either got an illegal drop curb or don't have a drop curb at all is very, we only get a very small amount of money. What more can we do as an authority to lobby the relevant partners to the courts and such like to see if we can get more powers to raise money from illegal crossovers? And I've got one more next.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I'm not sure I've actually got an answer to that. I know in the past we used to even put bollards up. So Mark's got his hand up again. Mark's ahead of me tonight.
It looks tatty. You've got street furniture everywhere.
I'm on a roll.
It is too much. I mean, I don't like bollards, but anyway, Mark can tell us what we're going to do.
And part of the issue, it's under Section 184 of the Highways Act 1980. It's a piece of legislation that's 41 years old, and it's a piece of legislation that needs to be updated. So the Department for Transport is being pressurised into looking at reviewing the legislation. One of the sections that does need a complete overhaul is Section 184, because the level of the fine associated with that is completely disproportionate to the cost involved. So the Department for Transport are aware of the need for that change.
My last question, and you know I'm going to raise the issue about the DVLA, and you know what the issue was. Chair, I had someone that actually registered a vehicle at my address, and you don't need to prove you live at the address to actually register your vehicle there. And so within a 3-month period, I got a bailiff visit, I got letters from Uri Council, I got loads of PCNs from TfL. So what more can we do as a local authority? And perhaps we can liaise with Councillor Ahmed through her London Council's links, because we've got to lobby hard, because this is ridiculous. I mean, everyone thinks it's a huge hoop. But I had a bailiff turn up at my door, wanted, and I had to prove that person didn't live there. It's ridiculous.
It's very stressful. It's very stressful, and we have that experience. A lot of people have had that experience, and then likewise, in another forum, you might be challenging me on my collection rates, and I would be saying, well, I am relying on the DVLA. So, I mean, as a collective group, London councils, us parking people, I wear my parking hat. We do have, well, I can remember the days we had conversations directly with the DVLA. Tim attends those meetings mostly now, as opposed to me, with Andy Luck and all, Tim. So I don't know if there's anything new, because they did put in measures to tighten up. So you had to. I think the person buying the car had to, they had to have both the new owner as well as the existing owner, that the previous owner submit the relevant documentation before they'd register.
Yeah, but you don't have to prove you live at the address, and that's the problem.
No, you don't. We've all just bought cars, registered them, sent it off, and that's it. So we will, we tend to raise those issues through London councils ourselves. And you're right, Councillor Ahmed. Councillor C herself can raise it through London councils.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
What is the procedure? I live near Shuttlecourt. And what is the procedure? Because I've had a few complaints from residents saying that people come there and they park their cars there because there's no restrictions. And one guy in particular is using it as a garage. So he's got a load of cars there that are blocking people who have a legitimate parking space. What is the procedure? What is the council's denouement on this?
Can I just ask, is that on the estate itself?
Yes.
That's Homes for Haringey.
It's Homes for Haringey. So I won't, and to be honest, I deal, we've had lots of conversations with them recently, but I'm not well enough informed to answer that on Chettle Court, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I mean, I suppose I sit on the Sahara board. I suppose that's the reason why a lot of residents do want Sahara to start controlling the parking lots.
Yes, yes.
Moment, it's you know, and you have to have permits because if you don't have permits, you can't enforce. So it's the same as on our roads. If you don't have permits, stop people.
Yeah. Yes, it would. It would. Yes, you need. Yes, robust controls. And when I say robust, you always have to be careful saying that in parking. But I mean, you know, practical ones that work for both parties. For those wanting to park the cars, as well as those wanting their area actually to be well maintained.
Yes, I think we need to take it up.
No, let him take it up with his councillor.
Yes. Okay, are there any further questions? I mean, I think it's sounding really useful. Are we, you know, we had a lot of controversy over the school streets, the Elmfield Road specifically. Are we monitoring quite closely, and I did ask this last time, or not possibly another meeting, but are we monitoring quite closely the number of PCAs? Because it can be an indication, well, it's an indication with Elmfield of how many cars we're using it as a country during school.
Yeah.
But also possibly, you know, it raised with us, you know, people saying that because of, it's not a cul-de-sac like some of the schools, so you come down the road and then you start to turn and you turn in without noticing the two signs that are on the edge of the road because they're not angled. So have we did that signage at all on our school streets?
I can't tell you it's done, but we've certainly discussed trying to alter it somewhat to make it more visible. The engineers have certainly promised to do that for me, but again, I'm sorry, I'm not well enough informed tonight. I didn't think of checking up on that one before I came to the meeting, but it's certainly on their radar to do if there's any possible movement that can make it more visible. And of course, we've got about another, I think, 8 school streets going live. Well, I think 6 of them are live and 2 more to follow this month. So we want to make sure that we are monitoring what's happening there from the very start.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. They're very popular in some respects until people get parking tickets, and then it kind of takes a different slant. And we want to make sure that the positive slant remains.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think that if officers could drive it, would maybe be useful. So actually,
well, it would be, and another colleague said we must go into the office again soon. We kind of go into the office now as a day. We used to fight to get a day working from home. That was a novelty. Now going into the office is a novelty. So I think I would be happy to do that, because then you understand, and also as a practitioner, you'd be able to look at where signs could be better placed. Yeah. Although I think, in fairness, Simi has done it. I think Simi and Tim Walker drove all of those roads before they actually went live with the first tranche. So, but I'll have a look as well.
Thank you.
Can I come here? Yeah. I can add a bit to that as well. In terms of the school streets, we're only required to put one sign up to indicate it as the start of a school street, but we're actually putting a sign on each side of the road. So we're doubling what we should be, what we need to do. But in addition to that, we do have advanced warning signs that you're approaching the school street as well. So effectively, there are 4 signs out there, whereas most of the time you'd only expect to have 1. So we've gone above and beyond in terms of giving advance warning that those school streets are there. But as Anne has said, you know, both Tim and Simi have actually been out to look at the sites, and they believe we've gone as far as we could reasonably be expected to do so. And it is a subject that we are continuing to talk about with Councillor Carter too. Joe Baker was on the call earlier on, but I noticed he's dropped off, but he would have been able to reinforce what I've just said. Hopefully that's useful.
And the other thing I wanted to just ask, in terms of traffic and parking, hire cars, you know, street cars, like other hire ones, zip cars, etc.
Yeah.
And also the bikes. Do we have plans to ensure that we have the infrastructure for them? So they're more popular, electric bikes and car sharing, etc. So is this something that we're thinking about, how we're actually going to deal with it?
I think it's fair to say it's something that we're thinking. It's my colleagues in transport planning are actually working on all of those measures. So the answer is yes, they are thinking about it. Where we're at this point in time, I'm not sure, to be honest, because LTNs have kind of taken over. It's you know, when there's limited capacity, LTNs are they've been working on those more recently, but definitely the hire bikes is something that they were very keen to introduce. So, but I haven't had confirmation of any arrangements being finalised at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on this paper at all?
No, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was excellent and an excellent update. I am so pleased that we're finally getting and have got our online offer, you know, improved, because that is, everybody does everything online now. So it's excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to leave. We don't have to stay for our last bit.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay. So the last thing that we're doing is our work plan, and we would like, it came out of our discussions. And we need to think about the scope of it, because I don't think we can do too large scope. But I think that we should be scrutinising LTAs.
Yeah.
Because I think that they're very controversial. Some people love them, some people hate them, etc.
And it's the impact on the drawing.
That was my point.
And so it impacts the borough generally.
Yeah.
But also, I think that in terms of the scope, I think you need to think about the scope quite carefully. And I don't know if you agree with me. What I've been thinking is that I'm not really that interested in what people think of LTNs in terms of, do I think they should be there or shouldn't be there in that kind of way? Because it's a very polarized discussion. And as I say, you've got people who love them and people who hate them. What I'm really interested in is, if you do them, how do you do them well? How does it work? So it works well for residents and for people in surrounding areas. You know, how do you escape? What's the best way that you can do them? And what are the pitfalls that have been in other boroughs, or where we've seen them, or for example, other boroughs that how do we avoid those conflicts when we do it in LTNs? Well, I don't know.
Unfortunately, our roads are very, very we're not congested, but many roads and narrow. So wherever you have an LTN, you're bound to have a backdrop of cars piling up because you close one entrance, etc. So there's always going to be problems. But I've sort of assisted in where people have really started having, you know, getting back to me. So, yeah.
I mean, I think that the thing is that they've worked quite well in some areas.
In some areas, yes.
And they've worked much less well in others, from my understanding.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I think it would be useful to try and see where they worked and where they haven't.
Absolutely.
And what has worked where they've worked in terms of, I don't know if you remember when they presented to us on LTNs, they presented different versions where it would displace all the traffic, it would only displace some of the traffic, you know, those kinds of things as well. So I just, my feeling is that we should be looking at what is the best locations for them, where do they work well, how are they best done, are they better bigger, are they better smaller, are they better, you know, you could have just, you know, quite small little areas like the area across the road from the Civic, across the road from the school, where people just used to cut through, so little areas where sat-navs are now sending people on the cut-throughs on residential roads, or you can have, you know, so I think they're interesting things to look at in terms of what's the best, I mean, the best LTN, as opposed to just we love them or we hate them, because and speculation, it's just going to do this.
I know one of the concerns you raised about Liverpool Crouch End was about the lack of engagement and consultation, both with, because it had the word Liverpool Crouch End in it, you could quite reasonably think, oh, I'm a Hornsey council, it's got nothing to do with me. But it did have a huge impact on Hornsey Board.
Not that it had nothing to do with us. The officers didn't think that.
Nothing to do with us either. Do you want to try and scope within the review, given the timescales and the size, just some ideas about what they've done to actually consult and engage, or do you think that's stretching it a bit? Because it is a key part, isn't it?
I think it is a key part, and I think certainly what happened with Liverpool Quartet was it was a salutary experience. But I think that the consultation and publicity is important.
Yeah.
I think
And it can affect it, not just Hornsey, Whiteman Road.
Oh God, Harringay. I mentioned it to Gina. She goes up through the roof.
Yeah, so that would have been impacted too.
Yeah, it affected. Yeah.
And yet no one was consulted.
I mean, all we can do as part of the evidence gathering is do a Q&A with Mike. Carter is leading on it, isn't he?
We need to speak. Obviously, we need to speak to Mike. We need to speak to the officers and get about the experience.
Yeah.
But also, what I would quite like to do is for us to look at the alternative in other boroughs, because we are really lagging behind. Most other boroughs have been putting LTNs in the last few years.
It would be particularly useful to look at those which are being reversed in other boroughs.
Yeah.
Look at that's what I mean. Places where they've gone well, and places where they've gone badly, and see if we can tease out at all the reasons for that. So I think that if we could look at stuff with that kind of with that.
Yeah, I think there's the. Yeah, we need to put together a scoping document in terms of reference. We do via email and have comments via email on that.
Yeah, I think that's
there is probably a process also of consulting with the relevant officers who are running the LTMs to sort of get their input into this.
Yes, no, definitely.
It's helpful to have a sort of have them on board and to sort of put the selling process.
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea of it is really we want to scrutinise as a scrutiny panel. We want to scrutinise to make the service better. So what we want to do is to try and look at things with a fresh set of eyes from a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
You know, not necessarily from the officer viewpoint, and then see whether we can come up with it.
Well, when had the meeting in Crouchen at the school, they had the meeting on that meeting. A public meeting. It was held about 6-7 months ago.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know. I didn't come to the actual in-person meeting because I was
So will we have a series of separate meetings about this in addition to the ones which are scheduled?
Yeah.
We'll have. I mean, I'm going to try and I'm going to be really careful because we all have busy times. So I don't want. That's why I'm exempted from that time because I don't want to have endless gathering sessions. People just talking because.
They will do.
Because there's lots, people feel very strongly on both sides. So we have the cycling and walking and etc.
Lobby
who feel very strongly in favour. We have some of the other residents groups and various other groups who are against. Yeah. So I don't want us to just hear what people feel about it because I don't think that necessarily is going to aid our scrutiny.
I think
we know it's contested. We know it's contested. I'm sure I've heard the arguments, you've heard the arguments. We know how contested it is. Let's try and be as tight as possible so that we do it in as few meetings as possible.
Can you tell me what are the objections or what's the overall objections on the LTN?
It's displaced traffic.
To displace traffic.
Displaced traffic. The effect of displaced. That's the primary, but let's speak about this after because we're not now going to discuss that. Okay, I think that's it, Phil. We can.
Yeah, I guess it's just like for the next meeting. When I previously said to me to assist Councillor Carter due to come, that's not actually. So for the 11th of November, currently we have the leader of the council and the new borough commander scheduled to come to go through the priorities for the community safety partnership for the year. That's quite a big item. We have given a commitment to run the North London Waste Authority coming to the next meeting around
this. And we're going to talk about trees.
Yes, we just need to think about that. That's really very big. It's
trees
really
in
to think
December.
about currently, but we can. We just need to have a think about perhaps amending the work plan and trying to think about how we get all of these in what is the best way of sort of. I don't want to have all of these big items come to the next meeting, and to sort of think about how best to rationalise this across the. Obviously, I don't have all three cabinet members.
We do have the youth risk strategy and all of that, but that's also going to be scrutinised by me.
Yeah.
So we could, although we need to have to have obviously time, I mean, obviously to have a report on that. I don't think it needs to be a full kind of scrutiny in our meeting on the is that is being scrutinised as a standalone project by
I think this is more about the borough commander setting out what the priorities are for the community partnership in terms of locally for Haringey and.
Oh no, we have to have that because of course, as we know, the borough command has changed as well. So we definitely need to. We can talk. We are going to need to. I was thinking that as well. We're going to extend it.
We need to try and fit senior in, don't we?
Yes. We will have to see the meetings with the single. It might be. It might not be much. Because they're going to budget. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are we done?
Thank you, everybody. Yes, thank you very much.
Just say, in our borough of Stroud Green,